Kevin Mitchell stood at the window of his small apartment, staring at the night sky. The stars twinkled above the Arizona desert, reminding him of all those nights in the Air Force when he dreamed of going higher than any pilot had gone before. After 15 years of flying experimental aircraft, he knew there was still one frontier left to conquer, the edge of space itself. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The caller ID showed it was Steve Bennett, his old friend from test pilot school. "Kevin, you need to see this," Steve said without any greeting. "Turn on the news, Channel 7. Kevin grabbed the remote and flipped to the channel. A news anchor was talking about a commercial space company called Stellar Dynamics. They were looking for experienced test pilots for a classified project. The company's logo flashed across the screen, a shooting star breaking through Earth's atmosphere. The next morning, Kevin drove his beaten-up pickup truck to the Stellar Dynamics facility outside Phoenix. The security guard checked his credentials twice before letting him through. The building looked ordinary from the outside, but inside it hummed with activity. Scientists in white coats hurried through corridors, carrying tablets and discussing equations he couldn't understand. Dr. Lisa Carter met him in the lobby. She was shorter than he expected, with gray streaked hair pulled back and a tight bun and eyes that seemed to look right through him. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." They walked through a maze of hallways until they reached a large conference room. The walls were covered with diagrams, calculations, and what looked like designs for some kind of specialized suit. A scale model of Earth's atmosphere sat on a table in the corner. "What do you know about Project Starfall?" Dr. Carter asked, closing the door behind them. "Nothing," Kevin admitted. "But I'm guessing it has something to do with those suits on the wall." She smiled. "We're going to make history, Mr. Mitchell. We're going to send someone to the edge of space, not in a rocket or a plane, but in a balloon. And then they're going to jump." Kevin's heart started racing. How high? 128,000 feet, higher than anyone has ever gone before attempting a freefall. The person who makes this jump will break the sound barrier using nothing but gravity and their own body. They'll experience temperatures cold enough to freeze blood. They'll be so high they can see the curvature of the Earth. Kevin walked over to the diagrams on the wall. The suit designs reminded him of something between a spacesuit and a pressure suit. What's the catch? The catch is that we need someone crazy enough to actually do it. Someone with experience in experimental aircraft. Someone who understands the risks of high-altitude operations. And someone who isn't afraid to push the boundaries of what's possible. She paused. "Your name came up in our search." Kevin thought about all those nights looking up at the stars. He thought about his father, who told him he'd never make it as a pilot. He thought about every person who'd ever said something was impossible. "When do we start?" he asked. Dr. Carter handed him a thick folder. "Right now. But first, you need to understand exactly what you're getting into. This jump will be more dangerous than anything you've ever done. You'll be traveling faster than any human has ever gone without an aircraft. If anything goes wrong." She let the sentence hang in the air. Kevin opened the folder. The first page showed a graph of temperatures at different altitudes. The numbers made his blood run cold. The second page detailed the effects of exposure to near-vacuum conditions on the human body. The third page was a liability waiver. He signed it without hesitation. "Welcome to Project Starfall," Dr. Carter said, taking the signed form. "Get ready for the ride of your life." As Kevin drove home that evening, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Soon, he would see that same sky from a place few humans had ever been. He would stand at the edge of space itself, look down at the Earth, curved like a marble below him, and then do something that most people would consider impossible. He couldn't wait to begin. The Stellar Dynamics facility buzzed with new energy as Dr. Lisa Carter gathered her team in the main conference room. She had spent 3 weeks picking the perfect people for Project Starfall, and now they sat around the large table, looking at each other with mixed curiosity and uncertainty. Kevin Mitchell studied his new teammates. Dr. Peter Hayes, the medical supervisor, was a tall man with kind eyes and steady hands. He had worked with mountain climbers and deep-sea divers, studying how the human body handled extreme conditions. Susan Martinez, the suit engineer, couldn't have been more than 30. Her desk was already covered with sketches and fabric samples. John Cooper, the mission control director, had gray hair and reading glasses that hung from a cord around his neck. He had guided hundreds of test flights, but never anything quite like this. Mary Parker, the weather specialist, was the last to arrive. She carried a laptop filled with atmospheric data and satellite images. "The winds at high altitudes are stronger than we expected," she said, pulling up a colorful map. "We'll need to choose our launch day very carefully." "That's why we're starting training now," Dr. Carter said. She clicked a button, and a large screen lowered from the ceiling. "Kevin will need to be ready for anything. The jump window might be only a few minutes long." Kevin felt everyone's eyes turn to him. "How soon can we start the test jumps?" Susan Martinez spoke up. "First, we need to get you fitted for the suit. We're calling it the Phoenix suit." She spread out a large blueprint on the table. "It has 3 layers. The inner layer controls your body temperature. The middle layer maintains pressure. The outer layer protects you from the extreme cold and helps with stability during supersonic flight." Dr. Hayes moved to the front of the room. "Before we put you in any suit, we need to know exactly how your body handles altitude." He held up what looked like a breathing mask connected to a small machine. "We'll start with pressure chamber tests tomorrow." The next few days passed in a blur of tests and measurements. Kevin spent hours in the pressure chamber, learning how his body reacted to thin air. His lungs burned and his joints ached, but he pushed through every test. Dr. Hayes watched his vital signs carefully, making notes and adjustments to their safety protocols. Susan worked late into the nights adjusting the suit design. "The fabric needs to be flexible enough for you to move but strong enough to handle the speed," she explained one evening, showing Kevin a sample of the material. At that altitude, any tear in the suit would be fatal. John Cooper set up a mock mission control center in one of the larger rooms. Screens covered the walls, showing weather data, suit readings, and tracking information. "Communication is everything," he told Kevin. "Once you're up there, our voice in your ear will be your only link to the ground." Mary Parker brought more concerning news about the weather. "The jet stream is shifting," she said, pointing to her latest maps. "We might have to wait for the right conditions. One wrong gust of wind at 128,000 feet could send you spinning out of control." Dr. Carter watched all of this with intense focus. She had fought hard to get funding for Project Starfall, and failure wasn't an option. "Each person in this room is the best at what they do," she told Kevin during a coffee break. "Trust them. Trust the equipment. Trust yourself." Kevin did trust them, but he also knew the risks. Every night, he studied the mission protocols until his eyes burned. He memorized emergency procedures and practiced them in his sleep. The team's dedication pushed him to work harder. 1 month into training, they gathered again in the conference room. The prototype suit stood in a glass case against the wall, its silvery fabric gleaming under the lights. It looked more like a spacesuit than anything used for skydiving. "Next week, we start the test jumps," Dr. Carter announced. "We'll begin at 30,000 feet and work our way up. Every jump will tell us something new." Kevin looked at the suit, then at his team. They had become more than colleagues. They were the people he would trust with his life. As he thought about the challenges ahead, he felt something he hadn't expected. Not fear, but excitement. The real work was about to begin. The first test jump did not go as planned. Kevin stood in the open door of the aircraft at 30,000 feet, wearing the prototype Phoenix suit. The morning sun glinted off his visor as he looked down at the desert below. Everything seemed perfect until he jumped. The suit was too stiff. Kevin could barely move his arms and legs to control his fall. He managed to land safely, but everyone knew they needed to start over. Susan Martinez locked herself in her workshop for 3 days, emerging only for coffee and quick meetings with her engineering team. The outer layer is fighting against every movement, she explained to Dr. Carter, spreading out new designs on the table. We need something that moves with Kevin, not against him. She held up a sample of new material that bent and flexed like rubber, but felt stronger than steel. The second prototype was better. Kevin completed 5 jumps from 30,000 feet, each one smoother than the last. The team watched from the ground as he practiced the moves that would keep him stable at supersonic speeds. Dr. Hayes monitored his vital signs, making sure the suit's life support systems worked perfectly. Then they moved up to 50,000 feet. The air at this height was so thin that Kevin had to breathe pure oxygen for an hour before each jump. The cold bit through the suit like tiny needles. During his 3rd jump at this altitude, the heating system failed. Kevin's teeth chattered so hard he could barely speak into his radio. His fingers turned white with frost. "Get him down now," Dr. Carter ordered through the radio. John Cooper talked Kevin through the emergency procedures, his calm voice guiding the jumper to a safe landing. Dr. Hayes was waiting on the ground with warm blankets and medical equipment. The team gathered that evening to study what went wrong. The batteries couldn't handle the cold, Susan said, pointing to the damaged heating elements. "We need something stronger." She sketched a new design, adding backup systems and better insulation. Mary Parker brought more challenges. "The winds at our target altitude are twice as strong as anything we tested," she said, showing them new weather data. "The suit needs to be stable enough to handle crosswinds at -70 degrees Fahrenheit." Kevin spent hours in the wind tunnel, testing the suit's stability. The powerful fans blasted him with freezing air while he practiced the body positions that would keep him from spinning out of control. Some days he came out bruised and exhausted, but he never complained. The team moved up to 75,000 feet for the next series of tests. At this height, Kevin could see the curve of the Earth. The sky above him was darker than he had ever seen it. The suit's new heating system worked perfectly, keeping him warm in the freezing air. During one jump, the radio crackled with static. For 30 seconds, Kevin was completely alone, falling through the thin air with no voice in his ear to guide him. The backup radio kicked in just before he reached his parachute altitude, but those 30 seconds taught them an important lesson. "We need triple redundancy on all communications," John Cooper said afterward. "At the real jump altitude, we can't risk any blackouts." He upgraded all the radio systems, adding backup frequencies and emergency protocols. Dr. Hayes studied the data from Kevin's body sensors. "Your heart rate barely changed when the radio failed," he told Kevin. "That's exactly the kind of calm we need up there." But the doctor still added more medical sensors to the suit, wanting to track every heartbeat and breath during the big jump. As the weeks passed, the Phoenix suit evolved. Each test revealed new problems, and each problem led to new solutions. Susan and her team worked around the clock, making improvements after every jump. The suit became more than just equipment. It was a work of art, designed to keep Kevin alive in conditions that would kill an unprotected human in seconds. The final test jump would be from 100,000 feet. If everything worked, they would move on to the real mission. Kevin looked at his team, seeing the tiredness in their eyes, but also the determination. They had come too far to give up now. Tomorrow, they would test the suit at a height where the air was practically space. Kevin wasn't afraid. He trusted the suit, he trusted his team, and most importantly, he trusted himself. The morning of the 100,000-foot test jump arrived with clear skies and calm winds. Kevin sat in the ready room as Susan Martinez checked every seal on the Phoenix suit for the 3rd time. The whole team felt the weight of this moment. If this jump worked, they would be ready for the real thing. Dr. Hayes attached the medical sensors to Kevin's chest and arms. "Remember, at this height, you'll have only 20% of the oxygen you're used to. The suit will compensate, but you need to tell us right away if anything feels wrong." John Cooper's voice crackled through the radio in Kevin's helmet. Communications check. All frequencies. They tested the main radio, both backups, and the emergency beacon. Kevin responded to each one, his voice steady and clear. The special balloon that would carry him up looked like a giant clear plastic bag when it was empty. As it filled with helium, it grew taller than a 10-story building. The small capsule that would carry Kevin hung beneath it, swaying gently in the morning breeze. Mary Parker studied her weather screens one last time. Wind conditions are perfect up to 80,000 feet. Above that, there's some turbulence, but nothing the suit can't handle. She marked the predicted landing zone on her map, far out in the empty desert. Kevin climbed into the capsule with Dr. Carter's help. The inside was barely bigger than an elevator. Screens showed his altitude, speed, and the suit's vital signs. A small window let him see out. The sun was just rising over the desert mountains. The balloon rose slowly at first. Kevin watched the stellar dynamics building shrink until it looked like a toy. At 50,000 feet, he could see 2 states at once. The sky grew darker with each passing minute. Then things started to go wrong. At 75,000 feet, warning lights flashed on Kevin's suit display. The pressure in his right glove was dropping. If it fell too low, his hand could swell up like a balloon. Susan's voice came through the radio, calm but urgent. Kevin, activate the backup pressure system for Zone 6. Kevin reached for the controls with his left hand. His fingers felt clumsy in the bulky glove. He found the right switch and flipped it. Nothing happened. The pressure kept dropping. Manual override isn't working, he reported. Frost was starting to form on the inside of his glove. His fingers were getting cold. Dr. Carter's voice cut through the radio chatter. Abort the mission. We're bringing you down. Wait, Kevin said. He remembered something from his Air Force days, a trick for dealing with pressure suit problems. Let me try something. He pressed his right arm against his side and flexed his hand 3 times. There was a click, and the pressure gauge jumped back to normal. The frost on his glove started to melt. Pressure stabilized. Susan reported from the ground. What did you do? Sometimes these suits just need a little persuasion, Kevin said, but he knew they had gotten lucky. At the real jump altitude, they couldn't afford any equipment problems. The team brought the balloon down slowly. Kevin stepped out of the capsule into the bright desert sun, his legs shaky from the 3-hour flight. Dr. Hayes rushed to check his vital signs, while Susan examined the suit. They found the problem in the glove's main seal. A tiny piece of dust had gotten caught in it during assembly, creating a microscopic leak. It was the kind of small detail that could have turned the real jump into a disaster. That evening, the team gathered to discuss what they had learned. Susan showed them a new design for the suit's seals, with better filters and triple-checked assembly procedures. Dr. Hayes wanted to add more backup systems for the life support equipment. John Cooper suggested improvements to the emergency protocols. Dr. Carter listened to all of this, making notes in her tablet. Finally, she looked at Kevin. What do you think? Are we ready for the real jump? Kevin thought about the view from 100,000 feet, about the darkness of the sky and the curve of the earth below. He thought about the suit problem and how they had solved it. Most of all, he thought about the team around him, each person working to keep him alive up there. Not yet, he said, but we're close. One more test jump. This time, everything has to be perfect. The second test jump from 100,000 feet went perfectly. Every system worked exactly as planned. Now, 3 weeks later, Kevin stood in the pre-dawn darkness, looking up at the massive balloon that would carry him to the edge of space. This was the real thing. No more tests. No more practice runs. The Phoenix suit felt different today. Susan had added extra layers of protection and more backup systems. It weighed nearly 100 pounds on the ground, but Kevin knew that wouldn't matter once he reached his jump height. The whole world would become weightless up there. Dr. Hayes followed him through the pre-flight medical checks. Your blood pressure is a little high, he said, looking at the readings. That's normal. Just remember your breathing exercises once you're in the capsule. Mary Parker rushed into the ready room with her laptop. Weather update, she said, showing them the latest satellite images. We have a perfect window. The winds are calm all the way up to jump altitude, but we need to launch within the next hour before things change. The capsule looked smaller than ever. They had removed everything that wasn't absolutely necessary to make room for the extra life support equipment. Kevin would have to stand for the entire 3-hour climb to jump altitude. John Cooper helped him inside and sealed the door. Communications check. John's voice came through all 3 radio systems. Primary, secondary, and emergency channels are all clear. Dr. Carter's voice followed. Kevin, this is your mission. If anything doesn't feel right, say the word, and we'll bring you down. No questions asked. Kevin looked through the small window as the ground crew released the balloon. The capsule lifted off so gently he barely felt it move. The sun was just starting to light up the eastern sky as he passed through 10,000 feet. The climb seemed to take forever. Kevin watched the numbers on his altitude display slowly increase. 50,000 feet, 75,000 feet, 90,000 feet. The sky grew darker with each passing minute. At 100,000 feet, he could see the stars even though it was daytime. Past 110,000 feet, the air pressure outside the capsule was less than 1% of what it was on the ground. If the capsule lost pressure now, his blood would boil in seconds. But the systems held steady. Everything was working perfectly. 120,000 feet, John announced from Mission Control. Beginning final checklist for jump preparation. Kevin went through each item carefully. Oxygen flow normal. Suit pressure stable. Radio communications clear. Emergency systems ready. The stars above him looked impossibly bright against the black sky. 125,000 feet. John's voice came again. You are go for jump altitude. The balloon kept climbing. Kevin felt completely alone, even with the voices from Mission Control in his ears. No human had ever gone this high without a rocket or a spaceship. The curve of the Earth stretched out below him, a perfect blue arc against the blackness of space. 128,000 feet, John said. Final altitude achieved. Standing by for jump confirmation. Kevin looked at his instruments one last time. Everything showed green. He thought about all the months of preparation, all the problems they had solved, all the people on the ground working to keep him safe. Then he thought about what he was about to do. He was going to step out of this capsule and fall faster than any human had ever fallen before. Mission Control, this is Mitchell, he said, his voice steady. All systems are green. Requesting permission to open capsule door. There was a brief pause. Kevin could almost feel the tension in the control room as everyone checked their readings one final time. Then Dr. Carter's voice came through, clear and confident. Permission granted. Good luck, Kevin. We'll see you on the ground. Kevin reached for the door handle. The moment he had trained for was finally here. In a few seconds, he would be falling through near space, breaking records and pushing the limits of what humans thought was possible. He took one last look at the stars, then began to turn the handle. The door of the capsule swung open. A rush of incredibly thin, cold air swirled around Kevin. He stood in the doorway, looking down at Earth from higher than any human had ever jumped before. The curve of the planet stretched out below him like a giant blue marble wrapped in white clouds. Remember, John's voice came through the radio. The first 30 seconds are critical. You need to stay in a delta position until you hit thicker air. The delta position was something Kevin had practiced hundreds of times. Head down, arms at his sides, legs straight but slightly spread. It would help him cut through the thin air like an arrow. Kevin took one last breath of pure oxygen from the capsule's supply. His heart was beating fast, but his mind was clear. He had trained for this moment. He knew exactly what to do. Mission Control, this is Mitchell. Beginning jump sequence. He stepped out into empty space. The first thing Kevin noticed was the complete silence. There was so little air up here that he couldn't even hear the wind. He was falling, but it didn't feel like falling. It felt like floating in perfect stillness, while the earth slowly grew larger below him. "Status check." Dr. Carter's voice came through the radio. "All systems normal," Kevin replied. His voice sounded strange in the perfect quiet. "Beginning acceleration phase." The suit's sensors showed his speed increasing. 100 miles per hour, 200, 300. The thin air offered almost no resistance. Kevin kept his body perfectly still in the delta position, just as he had practiced. A light on his wrist display started blinking. He was approaching the speed of sound. At 400 miles per hour, he felt the first real air resistance. Tiny vibrations ran through his suit as it cut through the increasingly thick atmosphere. The temperature outside was -70 degrees Fahrenheit, but the suit's heating system kept him warm. 500 miles per hour, John announced. Approaching sound barrier. Kevin saw his breath fogging up the inside of his visor. He was falling faster than anyone had ever fallen before. The curve of the earth was starting to flatten out as he got lower. He could see entire states spread out below him like a map. Then everything started to shake. The suit vibrated violently as Kevin hit the sound barrier. This was the most dangerous part of the jump, the moment when he would either make history or lose control completely. He kept his body perfectly still, fighting against the forces that tried to spin him around. 600 miles per hour, John's voice came through the static. "Stand by for sonic boom." Kevin burst through the sound barrier at 690 miles per hour. A shock wave spread out from his body, creating a small cloud in the thin air. He had done it. He was falling faster than the speed of sound. "Sonic boom confirmed," John said. "You are now supersonic. How do you feel?" "Like I'm flying," Kevin answered. The shaking had stopped. His suit cut through the air smoothly now, working exactly as Susan had designed it to. As he fell into thicker air, Kevin's speed began to decrease. He could hear the wind now, rushing past his helmet. The temperature rose as he got closer to Earth. Numbers flashed on his display. 80,000 feet, 60,000 feet, 40,000 feet. "Beginning stabilization for tube deployment," he reported. He moved his arms and legs slightly, shifting from the delta position to a more stable spread eagle pose. The suit responded perfectly to every movement. At 20,000 feet, the sky was blue again instead of black. Kevin could make out roads and buildings below. His speed had dropped to normal skydiving range. In less than 4 minutes, he had fallen from the edge of space to a height where planes fly. 5,000 feet, John announced. "Clear for tube deployment." Kevin reached for his parachute handle. In a few seconds, this historic jump would be over. But first, he took one last look up at the black sky where he had started. He had just done something that many people thought was impossible. Then he pulled the handle, and his orange and white parachute blossomed above him like a flower opening to the sun. Kevin's parachute carried him gently down to the desert floor. The landing was so smooth it felt like stepping off the bottom step of a staircase. As his feet touched the ground, he heard the sound of helicopter blades growing louder. The recovery team was on its way. Dr. Hayes reached him first, running across the desert sand with his medical kit. "How do you feel?" he asked, already checking Kevin's vital signs through the suit's sensors. The jump had lasted exactly 4 minutes and 27 seconds from exit to landing. "I feel amazing," Kevin said. And he meant it. His hands were shaking with leftover adrenaline as he removed his helmet. The desert air felt thick and warm after the thin coldness of near space. He could still see the perfect blackness of the sky in his mind. The rest of the team arrived in waves. Susan Martinez circled him with a tablet, downloading data from the suit's computers. The Phoenix suit had performed flawlessly, protecting him from temperatures that would have frozen him solid and pressures that would have made his blood boil. "You did it," Dr. Carter said simply, walking up with a bright smile on her face. 3 world records in one jump: highest altitude, longest free fall, and first supersonic jump without a vehicle. John Cooper was already talking to the record verification team on his phone. They had tracked every second of the jump with radar and GPS. All the data proved that Kevin had done exactly what they set out to do: jump from the edge of space and break the sound barrier using nothing but gravity. Mary Parker showed him the weather data from during his jump. The conditions were perfect, she said. But look at this: 10 minutes after you landed, the high-altitude winds picked up again. If we had waited any longer, we couldn't have done it today. News helicopters appeared in the sky, drawn by the official announcement of the jump's success. Reporters would want to know everything: how it felt, what he saw, what it meant for the future of high-altitude research and space safety. Kevin knew he would spend days answering questions, but right now he just wanted to sit with his team and let it all sink in. They set up a small shelter to get out of the sun. Someone brought coffee and sandwiches. The team sat together, talking about every detail of the jump. Susan was already making notes about improvements to the suit. Even though they had succeeded, she saw ways to make it even better. The applications for this technology are huge, Dr. Carter said, looking at her tablet. Space agencies are already calling. They want to use the suit design for emergency escapes from high-altitude aircraft and space stations. Your jump just proved it's possible to survive a fall from the edge of space. Kevin thought about future astronauts wearing suits like his, knowing they had a way to get back to Earth if something went wrong. He thought about other test pilots who would use this technology to push the boundaries even further. What they had done today would help keep people safe in the endless adventure of exploring space. The sun was setting by the time they packed up to leave. Kevin took one last look at the desert around him. Somewhere up there, far above the red and purple clouds of sunset, was the place where he had stood at the edge of his world and stepped into nothing. The memory of that moment would stay with him forever. "Ready to go?" Dr. Carter asked, holding the door of the helicopter open. "Almost," Kevin said. He looked at each member of his team, the people who had worked so hard to make this impossible thing possible. "Thank you," he said simply. "All of you. We did something incredible today." As the helicopter lifted off, Kevin watched the parachute team folding up his chute in the desert below. Tomorrow there would be press conferences and record certifications and endless questions. But right now, he just felt grateful. Grateful for the team that had helped him touch the stars. Grateful for the technology that had kept him safe. And grateful for the chance to prove that with enough preparation, dedication, and trust in each other, humans could do things that seemed impossible. The helicopter turned toward home, carrying them away from the desert where history had been made. But Kevin knew this wasn't really the end. It was just the beginning of what humans could achieve when they dared to dream big enough.